You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin Raw. Today, I am joined again with Fairlie. How are you doing, Fairlie?
I am okay, how are you?
I'm well. Today, we are going to be talking about Perfect Blue.
Yes, yes we are. I'm laughing because, honestly, when I was revisiting this, I kind of forgot how disturbing it was. This is a disturbing movie.
I would describe Perfect Blue as being the embodiment of that Rowdy Roddy Piper quote. The minute you think you know the answers, I change the question. The first time I watched this movie, I thought I understood it. And then the next time I watched it, I felt like, maybe I don't really understand it as much as I thought I did. And then watching it again in preparation to do this video, I'm at this point where I'm like, I don't even know if I understand this at all. Either I don't understand it, or it's probably like one of the darkest films I have ever seen.
It might be a little of both. I actually really like that about it. The fact that it does seem so nuanced. The darkness really creeps in from all sides. In preparation for this, I read the book that this is based on. And let me just say, it answers too many of those questions. The film is perfectly done. The book really it needed the film. It needed another person's eye to edit through and bring it to that place of really incredible darkness.
Perfect Blue is, of course, a 1997 animated film by director Satoshi Kon, who is famous for doing surrealistic films like Paprika and Millennium Actress and the not-so-surrealistic Tokyo Godfathers. And Satoshi Kon has said in interviews that he didn't even read the book Perfect Blue is based off of.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So I was curious if the film shared any relation to the book whatsoever. In my brain, I just kind of imagined someone vaguely describing the plot to Satoshi Kon and him going, yeah, okay, that sounds good. This is what I'm going to do. I'm curious to know how faithful the film is to the book.
Well, that is a good point, because I do think there's an element to both the book and the film that is completely dependent on understanding idol culture, or at least understanding the concept of what Japanese idol pop stars are. So looking at it, knowing now that he didn't even read the book, it could just be this is that exploration of the darkness surrounding the ideas of purity and popularity and things like that. Obviously, the main character's name is the same. That definitely is shared, and her plight as far as her career and those changes that she's undergoing are consistent in both the book and the film, but there is a lot more action in the book that is not necessarily transferred to the film. The film is much more about her career and those changes, and I think it's actually much more beautiful for that simplicity. So maybe he did just get a synopsis, off the back of the book or something.
Perfect Blue tells the story of Mima, who is a pop idol, and she's in the three-girl pop group Cham. And Cham is like a low-level J-idol pop group. They're not Morning Musume or Yumi Hamasaki. They're not selling out arenas. They're probably just one step above coffee shops.
I was reminded a lot of, I don't know if you saw, there was a idol documentary that Netflix did. Did you see that?
Tokyo Idols.
Yes. That portion of their career reminded me a lot of what you see on there, where you have these kind of more aspiring idol stars, and they're doing just backroom shows and definitely kind of building a grassroots following versus being signed to a really big label and manufactured and stuck with other girls that just match the image and stuff like that.
Tokyo Idols is about Ryo Higari, I think is her name. She is an idol, and she is at that low level, and she is trying to transition into the next level of being an idol. And so it's interesting that Tokyo Idol covers that period of Ryo's career, because that's basically what we see in Perfect Blue, where she's transitioning into becoming an actress, and this is kind of the source of her problems. It's at that point in the story where Mima retires from singing that we get the hint as the audience that she's kind of not all there, that maybe she's not completely connected with reality.
The word that I kept coming up to when I was kind of looking into idol culture and trying to understand this from that angle was graduating. A lot of people seem to talk about graduating into the next phase of your career as if idol stardom is really a stepping stone. It seems seen as a stepping stone, even to the girls doing it, where you know you're not going to be an idol forever. You are going to be a standalone pop star or an actress or something else, and you're just trying to get your image out there so that other people will be familiar enough with it that you can, and again, the word I keep giving to was graduate. So this is like Mima's graduation into a new phase.
That's an interesting way to phrase it, that she's graduating, because after Mima announces her retirement from Cham, she kind of starts to disconnect from reality, and as the film progresses, it becomes more and more and more surrealistic, where it gets to the point where we're not sure where reality and dreams end or begin. And even, I think, as you watch the film more, when that starts becomes more of a question as to whether it starts halfway in the film or whether the surrealism actually starts from minute one.
Yes, and I think if you recall every other conversation that we have ever had about any other film we've discussed, this is what I really enjoy about films like this, is that blurry line between, are we actually seeing what's happening, or are we witnessing somebody's decline into complete delirium? I absolutely agree. The more you watch this film, the more you have to wonder where it starts. Are we just watching the effects of stress on her mind? Are we watching her deepest fears as her career continues to progress? Or are we seeing a very dark reality?
Because Mima is a low-level actress, she's only able to get parts in like sleazy VCD movies, like Zero Woman, you know, those old Japanese exploitation films. In order to break away from her image, she decides to take on a role where she is raped. And that becomes this trigger point for the story. After that sequence, I think we've reached Mima's breaking point.
Yes, if you want to point to a moment where the film kind of takes a left turn and you're officially in what seems to maybe be fantasy territory, or at least very dark madness territory, it does seem to be that scene is kind of the breaking point for her. I watched this, I think, the first time, assuming that there was more to the story that we weren't getting, wondering if maybe that triggered something in her own background, if that was something that unlocked some sort of memory for her and just deteriorated her from that point on. But the idol culture is something that really is built around the concept of purity, or at least at the point that we're looking at, the 90s, and the book was written in the early 90s. We're certainly looking at a purity-based culture where idols were basically meant to be perpetual little girls that carried on this perfect innocence. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that this triggered something in her. From maybe like my Western perspective, that's what I got to first. This is a complete shattering of her image as an idol, as an innocent childhood star. Now she is thrust into this very dark adult world, and it's full of things that she didn't necessarily think that she was going to encounter. So it's kind of an interesting overlap of complications, I guess, that enter into the story here.
I would sit there and say that from minute one, we know Mima is not well. The thing that kind of struck me too, just rewatching it, was the jump cuts that are happening in the beginning, where we're going from Mima on the subway, Mima's on stage, Mima's in the grocery store, Mima's on stage, Mima's outside her apartment, Mima's on stage. The timeline is already all over the place.
Yeah, it is definitely something that you need to watch, not necessarily a linear standpoint. It's not going to make sense as a then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. You kind of need to do some piecing together of what might actually be happening. You're witnessing her perspective most of the time there. And I actually think that works really beautifully for the story itself.
What we're seeing from the beginning is this person spiraling into psychosis. It's an unwell person getting worse.
Yes, and putting herself in more and more stressful situations, which is only going to exacerbate that.
And then going back to what you're saying about the image of idols needing to sort of embody this childlike innocence. I mean, we could see this in Mima's personality, where she doesn't have a lot of range. You know, she's just kind of like happy anime girl. Some people might see that as some kind of writing flaw, where it's a very deliberate choice, that this character in her expression of herself is very stunted and very limited.
It is. It's a character trait. It's not a writing flaw. It's her playing the role that she thought she needed to play, but in perpetuity, and it's her life. She's not just playing the innocent little girl idol, she really seems to be that naive, innocent little girl now being pushed into a very adult world.
There is never really a reason given for why Mima wants to leave Cham. I tend to assume that, especially when you look at the scene where she's filming that rape sequence, and then we have that juxtaposition of the bystanders of the rape are being juxtaposed against the fans at the concert. So much of this movie is foreshadowing what's going to happen. Already as a pop idol, Mima feels exploited by these people watching her. And she's already becoming, I don't know if you want to say resentful, but it's already eating at her.
There does seem to be a very strong thread of like the male gaze involved in this movie, where the juxtaposition between that scene is a little heavy-handed. It does give you a pretty good insight into what she might be feeling in those moments, being up on stage, being part of this group, especially being so innocent as she is, to be kind of just like ogled constantly by these male fans clearly gets to her. So it could be that she thought maybe being an actress was more private. Maybe she thought that shooting scenes one-on-one with other actors and maybe a film crew was going to be easier for her to do from a privacy standpoint, but it is very clear right up front that that is not in fact the case. And she's put right back into that uncomfortable position of being watched and feeling vulnerable from the moment she begins.
There's the scene where she's talking to her mother, where she's not supportive of her decision to retire.
It's very interesting because in the book, she's actually kind of a seasoned idol. Rather than being part of this girl group struggling to get a foothold, she's already been an idol for about 3 years. And she's at a point where she's losing popularity because she is continuing that innocent girl shtick. And many idols, many of her peers are starting to incorporate more of a sex appeal. And her manager is the one pressuring her to change her image, to transition into something new and fresh so that she can still stay in the charts. Her family isn't really a factor, and in fact, they do talk a little bit about how a lot of these idols leave kind of country upbringings to go to the city and pursue stardom on their own, so we can assume that maybe Mima is one of these girls that left her family behind to pursue her dreams. But the transition is mostly her manager's idea in order for her to keep her career versus transitioning into a whole new one. But it still retains that idea of like, she really is through and through this innocent little girl. It's almost like not wanting to grow up in her image. She wants to stay as comfortable as possible in the safe, protected way she thought she was. And it's this transition into more of an adult role, more of the adult, sexy woman that brings about these crazed fans and this real, very actual real threat from the outside. So that I did think was a really interesting shift from the book to the film, because in the film, we almost get an impression that she has a choice. She maybe could have stayed in Cham and could have continued with her idol career, maybe eventually transitioned into a solo pop star, which seems to be what her mother wanted for her, versus going off on this other completely different route and becoming an actress, where you're going to have to do these very sleazy bit parts until you get more of a name for yourself, being kind of a novelty act for a little bit there as this transitioning idol. Definitely big stark difference, but I do think it also leaves it open to what I like better about the film, which is this really beautiful decline into this really stress-induced panic that we see her live wholly throughout the rest of the film.
You get a sense in the film that, you have Rumi who wants her to be an idol, but then her other manager, he's more supportive of her transitioning. The film seems to make it more clear that it is her choice.
It is her choice. She wants to graduate into this new phase of her career. And for the most part, at least half of her management team seems very supportive of it, which is helpful to her. But it is clearly a mental stress that she's not up for. I definitely get the impression that she had at least been prepared for the stresses of idol stardom, how much she was going to have to work, the shows, working in part of a team. I did get the impression that there was kind of like a third wheel thing going on with Chan, at least, in a couple scenes where it seemed like maybe she was kind of odd man out, although maybe that is due to the fact that she's not quite all there from the beginning. But it is her choice, whereas in the book it was not really wholly her choice, which really made the drama a little bit more real, like real world, between what she felt her fans expected from her and what she felt her management expected from her. In the film, the fans honestly almost seem imaginary most of the time. So that's another huge difference.
An interesting thing about this movie is this movie came out in 1997. And it's probably maybe one of the first anime films to kind of comment on internet fandom. Obviously, there's the whole like Mima's Room thing. But then even those three guys, those kind of Greek chorus, they're kind of this embodiment of internet fan culture where they're very cynical talking about her career and they talk about quote unquote Mima fans as if they're these weirdos, but they're the Mima fans. They talk about other people as if it's not them.
Yeah, no, it was great. Yes, I certainly watched a lot of that where they are so quintessentially stereotypical internet fans, which honestly I hadn't really put in context of the time that it was in, which is definitely right at the razor's edge of when that was all kind of starting. But they seem like so perfectly the stereotypical fans that it almost seems like they're her internal critic. They are saying the words that maybe are driving her to this transition in her career. Maybe she feels she has to because these are the words that she's putting on herself. The cynical, kind of biting commentary on her idol career and where she needs to go from there.
She's almost like when you tweet something out and you try to imagine what the worst response to your tweet's going to be.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it seems like they are most of the time.
But I do think that's another level the film is working on, which is just this idea of fan entitlement. Like, well, me as the fan know what's best for you, the artist. So you really should be consulting with me for your career.
Well, that's exactly what the book is about. That's the entirety of the book. And even at the end, the author had left an afterword. The book was written in 1991, so a little bit earlier, which is honestly like light years in internet age terms, but not very long before the film was released. But he had explained that he was actually involved in idol fan culture and wrote it based on those exact conversations that he heard about, well, I know what's best for my idol, and the possessiveness that some of these people have for people that they've never met before. And that's really the entirety of the plot of the book, where you have one obsessive fan convinced that he is taking it upon himself to do what's best for Mima, which is to stop her from changing anymore. He alone knows what's best for her image and can speak for the entirety of her fan base when he tells her that she's not allowed to change. So the interesting thing about the transition to film is that you do still have that underlayer. You do still certainly have that layer of this is about the fans perceiving their quote-unquote idol through these transitions in their career, but it's much more personal to Mima, and it's much more about how she internalizes these things and how she, as a person, handles the stress that comes with it, which is, I think, a much more elegant plotline.